I contend that the world's greatest problem can be communicated in a single word: lostness.
Good evening. I want to welcome you to a very special evening that we have planned. We have entitled tonight's conversation, Evangelism, How to Win as a Team. And if you saw this around and you may be thinking, why do we need to discuss a topic that seems to be over-talked maybe? Well, Dr. David Beck talks about evangelism as it was the lifeblood of the early church. And if you look at all the current statistics, it seems to indicate that the blood has all but stopped pumping in the local church. And so in Lifeway research in 2019, just to show a few statistics about this, in 2019 they looked at 34 Protestant denominations and found that there were 3,000 churches started, but there were 4,500 that were closed during that year. In the same year, the Barna Research Group revealed in a study that they put out that 47% of practicing evangelical millennials say that it is wrong to share the gospel. It wasn't much better, but 56% of practicing Christian adults in America share the gospel with a non-believer 2 or fewer times a year. And so if a human body, if it does not have blood flowing through it, then it's not going to remain alive long. So could it be that one of the major reasons that thousands of churches will close their doors next year could be a lack of blood supply, a lack of blood flow, a lack of evangelism? Dr. Ken Priddy seems to think so. He says that you evangelize to revitalize, you do not revitalize to evangelize. And what he means simply is that if a church is going to experience new growth, new revitalization, then it must give itself first to evangelism, which will then revitalize the church. So going forward, I contend that one of the most important spiritually healthy markers of a local church is its practice of consistent evangelism. I also see that in the Bible, the model of that is more of a team approach rather than an individual approach, although we acknowledge that a personal evangelism is important. And so then lastly, I contend that if a church is going to experience revitalization, then it has to get the blood flowing again through team-oriented evangelism. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And we are so honored to have our 4 expert panelists tonight. And I do believe that these are 4 expert practitioners and that we are blessed to have here tonight. So I want to introduce them real quick to you. To my left here is Dr. Wade Phillips. And Wade, many of you have seen him around. He is the executive pastor and has been since 2019 just at Northcrest Baptist Church, just down the road. And he's been on staff there since 2016. And Northcrest is a church that I believe is spiritually healthy, and they are a team that has, or a church that has cultivated this team-oriented mentality in evangelism. So we're so excited to have Dr. Wade Phillips with us. So would you welcome him, please, to our panel? Next to him is Don Lum, and Don has served as our State Evangelism Director of the Mississippi Baptist Convention Board since 2006, and he has been on staff there since 1997. And so Don brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to our panel tonight. And also, one thing about Don is, as much as he loves seeing individual people come to the Lord, he also loves seeing the church do this together through resourcing and assisting the church and planning events to where churches can do this together. So would you welcome Don Lum? Next to him, we have Jay Clark. Jay is the lead pastor down at Church at the Ark over in Philadelphia, Mississippi. And Jay has, they planted just a couple years ago, or a little bit more than 2 years ago. But this is another church that I believe is a spiritually healthy, growing church, a dynamic church that is reaching people as a team. In fact, they baptized 25 people last year, and that's pretty remarkable, seeing that the church is correct me if I'm wrong, a little bit more than 100, maybe a little bit more than that. Maybe I'm not giving you enough credit. Maybe it's thousands. Okay, so, but it's pretty remarkable that this church is in the heart of Philadelphia and reaching people as a team. So we're excited that he's here. Would you welcome Jay Clark? And last but certainly not least is Doug Goodman, and Doug is the pastor down at New Hope Baptist Church over in the Clarkdale community, and which he has been there for 8 years now. Yeah. And under his leadership, I believe that I have seen New Hope grow, and not just numerically, but in new passion, new vision, new life, a resurgence there on that side of the county, and that church is really reaching a lot of people in that part of the kingdom. So we are so glad that Doug is here and is going to share his thoughts on our panel. So would you please welcome Doug Goodman? Now, I want to give a brief word of what's going to take place tonight. So we have 3 30-minute panel discussions, each with 3 different topics relating or regarding evangelism. And so after the 30-minute discussion, we'll take a brief Q&A. So if you have questions, you were given a listening guide when you came in. You can jot down notes. You can write those questions out so you won't forget them. And at that time, we'll have just a few minutes that you can make your way down to one of the 2 mics, ask the question clearly and concisely, and then someone from our panel will be glad to answer that. And then after our Q&A, then we'll have a brief break that you can get refreshments, go to the restroom and things like that, and those are out of the double doors all the way down to the hall to my left, your right down there. And so now that we have all those preliminaries out of the way, let's start the conversation with topic number 1, leading the team. So Lee Robertson once said in 1976 that John Maxwell later made famous, everything rises and falls on leadership. So if the church is a team and we're to share the gospel as a team, then it must begin with leadership. So let's talk about that. So how have you seen a lack of evangelism affect a church's health?
Well, it starts out with saying that when there's no vision, everything just stalls. When there's not a vision for what you're trying to do. If your vision is not clear for the church, then the church comes to worship. Mississippi Baptist, by the way, there are about 2,200 Mississippi Baptist churches. We do things a little different in different places, and we're located in different places across the state. But we all come together pretty much on Sundays to worship and have that time together. But if all we're going to do is come and worship and leave and not be focused upon trying to reach people and to encourage other people to come, then we're not going to see it happen.
A church that is not evangelizing is being disobedient, and disobedient churches can't be healthy churches. So I like the idea that a church would not do some kind of evangelism. Just seems something that is completely foreign to the New Testament and foreign to how churches ought to be thinking about who they are. There are certainly other things that a church can do, but God gave the church, Jesus gave the church this one big command: go and make disciples. And the way you do that is by evangelizing them, then discipling them. Evangelism is that one step in discipleship. And if you don't, then you're going to die. There's no way around it. You're going to die if you don't make new disciples.
I think we got to realize too that a church can't be healthy without evangelism. It's absolutely impossible. It's opposed to the New Testament church. It doesn't function that way. I think Charles Spurgeon said, a church can't be non-missional. It can't be a church if it's non-missional. And I think for us, I think about you talking about a minute ago about the blood circulating in church, right? I think about us physically. If we're lethargic and lazy and lax in all that we do, and all we do is sit and take in food, we're not healthy physically. And the same in the church. If all we do is gather and we just take in information and take in information and take in information, sermons and teachings, and we don't ever apply it and use it, and a part of that being the greatest commission to us, if we don't ever use that, we're not a healthy church. We can't be healthy. We can't be healthy physically, and we can't be healthy spiritually as a body or an individual. Can a believer be healthy if they don't have a desire to share and tell people about Christ? We can't be. We're not a disciple if we're not desiring to make disciples. So it can't go together.
Jay, do you have anything to add?
I'll just say that one thing, I mean, I'm on the pastor side of this now, but, you know, one thing I never let myself forget as a follower of Christ, and now even more so as I'm to set an example for my people, is somebody shared the gospel with me, and because they did that, I heard it, and it changed my life. So I'm never going to stop doing that, and so that also shows my people that I'm not just preaching it, but I want them to be with me and see me do it.
You bring that up because that's where we're going next. And so let's listen to what Spurgeon talks about. You just mentioned Spurgeon. So in his book, The Soul Winner, this is what he says. He writes, "We must always be an earnest example ourselves." He's writing to pastors here, preachers. "A minister who is slow to move won't have a lively, zealous church. A man who is indifferent or who does his work with as little effort as possible should not expect to have people around him who are serious about the salvation of souls." So what encouragement would you give to a pastor or church leadership who may struggle in practicing personal evangelism?
I think the first and foremost thing that a pastor can do, because the main thing that his people are going to see from him every week is he's going to see him preaching. And the most important thing that a pastor can do when he preaches is make it seem like the gospel is the best news in the world.
That's right.
Because it is. And if the pastor stands in front of them every Sunday and he doesn't act like he has the best news in the world for these people who are sitting in the pews, they're not going to see it that way, and they're not going to tell anybody about it. So I think it starts there. There are plenty of other things, lots of other things a pastor ought to do, but it starts in the pulpit, telling people how good this good news is.
It starts in the pulpit from the church's perspective, but from the pastor's perspective, it starts in his own personal study of God's Word. And you've already said it, that is, as a Christian, and particularly as a man, one who's called, a man who's been called, that to share in Christ needs to be a mandate. And but I'll tell you this: the other side of that is that we have to remind ourselves and say that, because if not, a pastor himself will get so caught up with so many things and so many responsibilities that come to him that he needs to do, that's easy to slide back, because there's nobody that's holding his feet to the fire.
Right.
You know.
I think what Don says is important, because there's a lot of times in pastoral ministry when you get consumed in all the other things that are taking place and really just ministering to the flock that God's already given you, and putting out fires and whatever that is, and you become consumed in that. So often that's the thing that kind of fades. And if you don't constantly have a renewal in your own heart, you know, as Paul told Timothy, fan into flame the gift of God in you, you know, and kind of like you said, to be reminded, hey, the gospel came to me, and the gospel saved my soul, and a church will never be revived without new life. You got to have new life. New life brings an energy that you can't stop, you know, when you see people coming to Christ.
One thing for a pastor, when I was not a pastor, I ran into a lot more lost people than I do as a pastor. You know, day to day, as church people. And so you have to work hard at that to make sure you're around people who need to hear the gospel. So we talked a little bit, Don brought that up, is that in the pastor study, in his own personal quiet time. So let's talk about prayer for a second. What is the role that you see prayer playing in the life of a pastor and or church leadership when it comes to maybe fanning that flame of evangelism?
Well, I know that when I was in Sebastopol for 13 years, what I saw every year was that we were winning children and youth to Christ, but we weren't winning adults. And so I said, well, why not? I asked the question, why not? And so, I looked at everything. We found out we spent money, lots of money on youth and kids. We spent lots of time with youth and kids. We were very strategic towards children and youth, and we were praying for them. Those were all like 4 things we weren't doing for adults. And so the first thing we started doing to begin our strategy for adults was we just started praying, God, will you save adults? Because there's lots of lost ones out there. And immediately that year, we began to see more adults come to Christ and saved.
Amen.
The motto at our church this year is something Oswald Chambers said. He said, very often we think of prayer as the thing we do to get ready for the work, but prayer is the actual work. And so we have to see prayer as not the thing that we do to get what we want from God, but the thing that we do because that's what the job is. Not just for those of us who work, vocationally in ministry, but for all of us. Prayer has to be the starting point for everything, and we have to be focused on that at all times.
I think we've got to realize that evangelism and reaching lost people is a spiritual battle. And if you don't cover that in prayer on the front end, for the believer, there's a hindrance to share the gospel. There's too many believers hindered. I'm afraid, or I'm not passionate enough. And for the believer, prayer lines you up with the heart of God and also gives you the boldness to share. You find the very heart of Christ, to seek and to say that which was lost. But also to undergird in prayer, like what you're talking about, is you're praying for the lost soul, for God to unblind them, for God to open their heart that they might receive and give it an opportunity for that conversation. So prayer's working on both sides of that. Without prayer, you're just trying to do what man can do. You're not trying to seek what God can do. It's essential in that. I can remember, I'll just share this. We've had some times in ministry where, as a pastor, you have those times where there's a lot of harvest, and there are times where you're just sowing, and you're just sowing, and you're sowing, you're preaching your heart out, and nothing's happening. People's not coming to Christ. And I can remember a number of times in my ministry, and I almost share this with hesitation, but I'll share it because you're talking about what a pastor does. I can remember a number of times, somewhat broken, going and sitting in our baptistry and asking for God to speak to whomever He chose, to stir the baptism water so that the church could experience new life, that the church could see that. And there's a lot of churches out there that are dying, that are struggling with the reality of, hey, they hadn't filled their baptistry in a year or 2 years or whatever that is, and they've forgotten that. And it really just helps point your heart back to what your purpose is as a church, and it comes back to the pastor. They're going to be excited about what you're excited about. And it starts with just prayer.
Let me turn that for just a second and say to you, we're talking about pastors and pastors trying to be the leader, and pastor trying to lead the church to be evangelistic and do those things. One of the things where that fits in with you as a congregation, and we're talking about team, being a team together, and that is making the component of praying for your pastor specific. And God continue to give him the passion. God continue to protect him from the evil one. God would continue to protect him from all the things that would zap him from wanting to do what you've called him to do. So that comes back to you as a church and as a congregation. Right. What is it that I can do? How can I be a part of that? You just mentioned they're going to see more lost people than you're going to see. That being the case, then one of the things is praying for him, introducing him to some of those people that you're talking to, and friends, and different ways of being able to do that, and a team concept that allows you to work together to reach people for Christ.
That's good. Let's take that now and go to the next question, which is really kind of another aspect of what you just brought up, is that our people that we shepherd, they're going to, they're people that in their lives that we'll never meet, and so God has us in all these different areas. But part of our jobs as pastors is to shape these gospel environments for people to hopefully work in and through. And so the question here is, as pastors and church leaders, how can we help shape environments, maybe inside the church and maybe even outside of the church, that will foster sharing the gospel with others?
The first thing the first thing a pastor must do is make sure that all of his preaching and all of his teaching is gospel shaped. I can stand before you and I can preach a sermon that is directly from the Bible, and if it doesn't have Christ and Him crucified in it, then I have failed. The most important thing that the pastor can do, and I go back to preaching because that is where you're going to have your most contact with people. The most important thing that a pastor can do is have their sermon shaped around the gospel every single time they stand in the pulpit. Because every time, they may not get it the first time or the 10th time, but if every single time a pastor stands in front of his congregation and preaches, they hear the gospel, that is going to get in, that is going to seep in. And so I think that's the most important thing that they can do. There's lots of other things, but I think it starts there.
You had something, Don?
I'm just thinking in terms of you standing before your people are praying for you. If they're praying for you to be, not only have a word from God, but a word that is going to not only touch their hearts, but even those people that will encourage them as they then continue doing their jobs around people throughout the week and the things that they're able to do. And as you do those things together, you're going to begin to see the water stirred. You're going to begin to see men and women whose hearts are stirred because God is at work and making a difference in their lives.
So, pushing into this a little bit more, how can we as pastors, since we shepherd the flock, maybe in areas like children's ministry, maybe in areas of student ministry, maybe, Doug, a while ago you said you guys are getting ready to launch life groups. You guys have life groups. Those are environments inside and or outside of the church, but that doesn't mean that they're just automatically places to share the gospel. So how can we as pastors help foster that and shape that environment to where it makes that more readily an action?
I think it's important that we as pastors really evaluate every event or activity of our church. And I kind of go back to kind of what Wade was saying. If it does not have an evangelistic component, we probably shouldn't be doing it. If it doesn't have an opportunity in there somewhere to share the gospel with that group that's there, we do whatever to get them there, but if we're not there to evangelize to them, what's our purpose in it? You know, so you create atmospheres that do that, whether it be Vacation Bible School and you talk to your leaders and you help equip them and guide them and you help them know that that's the reason we're doing that. And you just culture that. Whatever activity you have, you want to make sure it's got an evangelistic component to it, whether it be I can speak for us personally, whether it be, hey, we minister to the schools and teachers and we have an opportunity to feed them a lunch activity. Well, guess what? They don't eat lunch without hearing the gospel. I mean, it's the purpose of whatever you do. So you foster that, and when your people see continually whatever you say, and I just, at any time, me personally, I have an opportunity at a microphone, I'm going to talk about the gospel. That's what you do. You got to keep that before your people.
So let's move into a different aspect of that, talking about the gospel, and we'll say talking about evangelism. Max Stiles, in his book Evangelism, How the Whole Church Speaks of Jesus, he writes that besides teaching and modeling evangelism, one of the most important things leaders can do is just talk about evangelism. So can you help us understand where are some spaces or opportunities that pastors can, other than teaching from the pulpit maybe, other than modeling it, just talking about evangelism? Maybe we could discuss maybe where some of those spaces are or those opportunities are that come up through the week.
One of the things that churches are doing and to engage people outside the church, and y'all are probably doing this in your churches, and that is looking for opportunities to engage people who may not come in here. They may not come to this, but they may come to an event that you're doing or something else where you have an opportunity to talk to them individually, but where you also have an opportunity to bring somebody in who's going to talk to them and do that. We've seen that happen really well with wild game events throughout Mississippi and other places, but I don't know if your church does anything like that, but something that's going to draw people who probably will not get up on Sunday morning and come to this worship service or to another church, but they would come to an event that you're hosting and having it somewhere else. It was interesting. I was at a birthday party this week, Friday night, and one of the guys said, "I'm fixing to leave and I'm going to a father-daughter dance." And I said, "Really, who's hosting it?" And he said, "My church." And so I said, "Great, where's it going to be?" And I asked, I figured it would be in their gym or their fellowship hall. And he said, "No, they've rented a facility down from our church." And I said, "What a neat thing that this might be able to get dads to bring their daughters to who don't come to church, and they may not even realize that what it is, because it's not connected actually to the church, but the church is all over it and all over what they're trying to accomplish with it, which is to share Jesus.
Yeah, I've got some guys in the church that I don't prime them. God gave them the vision, but I would call it have conversations. Sometimes it's from the stage. Sometimes it's in small meetings. But they always say this, something like this: it's not the pastor's job to evangelize our town. It's our job. And so I think that's real important for leaders of Highland Baptist Church or all of our churches. Because it can we do it all the time, so we probably get droned out more than anybody else. But if you start having leaders from among the peers, from among family groups, they're standing up and say it's our job, then I think that raises the expectation. And the other thing, I don't think I could ever leave out that leaders looking for opportunities to model sharing the gospel in public places, whether it's eating at the hospital, at ball games,
right.
If it's at a dinner, a wild game, whatever it is, we do basketball. We say we want to take it to where people live, where they work, and where they play. And a part of the vision of our church is that all of us have an expectation that we're going out and looking for those opportunities.
So part of this could be that we're talking about evangelism. I mean, we're teaching it, we're modeling it, maybe in those opportunities. But would you consider, and maybe you have something to speak for this, would you consider talking about evangelism as part of a discipleship, of helping another person as you were just conversing, whether it's over coffee or over lunch or whatever, two people, whether it's maybe somebody that you're meeting with, and you're just talking about evangelism. Your intent is not to teach the body, it's not to model at that moment. I mean, have you guys had any experience in that, or had anyone do that with you that you'd like to share?
That is a common conversation that I have with people in my church, and I think that's something that has developed over time. It becomes a part of your DNA, it becomes a part of your culture. Especially when you begin to see people saved in your church and see people come to Christ in your church, people get excited about that. They want to see more of it. So it's going to be a common discussion that's going to happen among people in your church. It's the expectation in my church that we're going to see people saved. We're going to have opportunities to share the gospel with people. And so if we're talking about church, we're probably not talking about some event that we're doing. We're talking about the gospel and how can we share the gospel with people.
Appreciate that.
I think we don't realize how much encouragement people need, and they need to hear stories. They need to see, and whether that be a one-on-one conversation of one person sharing with another person, somebody that they led to Christ, got to experience that and the story behind that. But our church needs that. Our church needs to hear us talk about. We need to talk about people that are not in the pew, people that are not here, somebody out there that needs to be part of the body of Christ. And we need to consistently point our people outward. If we don't do that, it just becomes about us. So I think every conversation is us talking about the need of lostness and then the hope that we have as a church.
So I appreciate those thoughts. Those are, I hope you're listening to this, because these are four guys that are really walking through what is the common heartbeat that they have in their churches. And so one of the things that's interesting that's come out recently is Tom Rainer wrote a book, The Autopsy of a Deceased Church, and then later he released another book called An Anatomy of a Revived Church. And in that Anatomy of a Revived Church, he states that over one half of the revived churches we studied made a transition. And here's the transition. They began including conversions as part of their scorecard. So our question is, why should tracking conversions and baptisms be important, and how you may have seen churches celebrate these?
One of the things that we've done for years, if I say for years, probably for the last 10 years, except during the COVID pandemic, was to be able to send a baptism report to our churches, a certificate that we would send out to the church and say, this is your baptisms in 2019, 2022, 2023, whatever the case may be. And churches would get those, and that would be a report of what they've done. But what we're talking about here is, at least as I see it, is the church, is the pastor's leadership of trying to help that church understand this is a piece of paper saying what we've done, but on the other side of that, coming from where y'all are with your churches, and that is saying, okay, how can we keep that before us so that we desire to see the baptismal water stirred, that we desire to see moms and dads bringing their children to the pastor and saying, we've been talking at home, we've been talking, now they want to talk to you, or doing that where you're inviting, where you're introducing a friend to a pastor or a Sunday school teacher and saying, this is Jim, and I wanted you to know him, and help them to understand, and as a church family, where you as a church understand that God is calling you to be involved in the evangelism process.
Baptisms ought to be a celebration. I think that's one way you can get people to see the understanding of the importance of it and see, is it a metric? I don't know that my church considers it a good Sunday unless we had a baptism in our church. And when we do it, there used to be a time when we did baptisms, we would like have this low, solemn music playing, and it'd be like, and it sounded, we're definitely going to have a burial. I don't know if we're going to have a resurrection or not with that music, But we made a change a few years ago to where during a time of baptism, it is a celebration. There is not solemn music playing, there is music playing, and when it's over, like our choirs, like boom, they start singing again, we're celebrating, people's cheering. You ought to see every time someone goes from death to life, this is the most exciting thing that we can do as a church and be a part of as a church, to see the miracle that God takes someone who is his enemy and makes them his friend and adopts them into his family. There's nothing better than that. And so when churches recognize that, they're going to want to keep score, for lack of a better word. They're going to want to know what's happening, how's it happening, and who's next, And
That's
so that
good.
ought to be the attitude that we have, I think.
That's
So
good.
on the last two, before we're gonna answer this, and then we're gonna get to our last question. But how do your churches celebrate baptisms?
Well, we have very limited facilities, so we have a portable baptistry, and my point in that is that we always do it after the service. Everybody goes outside, and we all gather around the baptistry, and so there's an element of that's really special.
Yeah.
And everybody's actually really close. They all gather up right around it. You can go on our Facebook and look at some of those pictures. And I love it. So it makes it very unique and special. Of course, we celebrate, we clap, we yell, we holler, we laugh together. So because the same reason, which one of you, if one of your sheep went lost, would you not leave the 99 to go find the one? And when you did, would you not put them on your shoulders? And when you got back home, would you not invite your family and friends and rejoice over that which was lost is found? And the Bible tells us that heaven rejoices over one. So that's what we make it all about.
So Doug, before you answer yours, I'm going to have to move to the last question. I'm going to give you the first crack at the last question, okay? So the last question here is going to be, what are some simple tools, tips, or hacks that you would give to help church leadership organize their daily schedules for evangelistic opportunities? A while ago, you had brought up about just the struggles that pastors can get into with all the stuff that we have to do. So what is maybe one tip that you could give maybe a pastor or church leadership here that's wanting to get a handle on their schedule to be able to do this more?
I think it goes back to kind of like what Jason said a while ago. It's wherever you go, look for opportunities. And if you get up every morning and you're looking for God to give you an opportunity that day to share with the gospel with somebody, that's your intention that day. That's the reason God's given you breath that day. Who can I talk to about the Lord today? And whether it be restaurant or in town or a gas station or wherever it is, you know, just a couple weeks ago, walked in AutoZone, there's two ladies in there in tears. Perfect opportunity. God gave it to you, right? I'm in there to buy an auto part, but God's given me a different opportunity. So how do you use that, you know, an opportunity to minister to somebody and find out where they are in their walk with the Lord? And you got to model that. And as a pastor, I go back to the other question, kind of together, your church is going to celebrate what you celebrate. And if you make a big deal out of baptism with t-shirts and celebrations, and I kind of like the outside trough personally. I think we've done that with children's ministry before, and it's a great celebration. It's out of the ordinary. And it's kind of like Wade said, I mean, it's the coolest thing in the world. You saw a miracle before you when you see somebody come to Christ. And if you celebrate that, and as their whole family draws to watch that person be baptized and follow believers' baptism, you've got an opportunity to share the gospel there with all of them. So there's a lot of people reached, I think, through baptism. And
One more response to that question, Jay.
Yeah, from 2000 to 2008, I lived in Portland, Oregon, and I was going to seminary. I didn't know God was calling me to be a pastor yet, but my pastor asked me to be his associate, and so I thought, I'll do this. And so we met once a week. Well, our staff meeting, we're a small church there in the city, and our staff meeting was every Wednesday morning, 9 o'clock at the Abbey Cafe on Killingsworth Avenue. And we did that for years.
Right.
And it was unbelievable. We won people to Christ sitting in that cafe. We won the cafe owners to Christ. We prayed over people for healing and forgiveness in their life. That cafe became our hangout after church on Sundays. The cafe owners started letting us come there for fellowship afterwards. It was closed, but they would open it up just for us. And so I saw a really incredible transformation and opportunity by doing that. So when we planted the Ark, I decided, you know what, I don't want an office. And so I kind of stole from John Wesley. I said, the world is my office. So
right.
I meet with people out in the public. Everywhere I go, usually I'm meeting at the Junction or City Limits or at Jay's Coffee House or something like that.
Good.